The diplomatic station hung in the darkness of space like a jewel suspended between stars. And Daniel Carter watched it grow larger through the viewport of the human transport vessel as they approached for docking. His hands clasped behind his back in a posture that had become second nature during his years in the Marine Corps before he transitioned to diplomatic security work for Earth's fledgling Galactic Relations Department ambassador. Linda Hayes stood beside him, her reflection visible in the transparent aluminum as she reviewed her notes on a tablet. And she looked tired from the 3-week journey, but determined to see this mission through no matter what obstacles awaited them on the other side of that airlock. The Corvath delegation arrived yesterday, she said, without looking up from her screen. And intelligence reports suggest they are not happy about humanity requesting a seat at the trade accords negotiating table. Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes tracking a massive warship that drifted past their viewport, its hull covered in battle scars and weapon arrays that spoke of a species that had conquered their way to power rather than negotiating for it. They see us as newcomers who have not earned our place, he replied. And in their culture, strength is the only currency that matters. The docking procedure took another 20 minutes. And when the airlock finally hissed open, Daniel stepped through first as protocol demanded, scanning the reception area with eyes trained to spot threats in crowded spaces and open corridors alike. What he saw made his stomach tighten with unease. The Corvath delegation stood waiting, but they had not come alone. And behind their armored warriors sat a massive containment unit that hummed with power, its surface covered in warning symbols that Daniel did not need to translate to understand. Commander Zorath stepped forward from the Corvath group, his scaled skin gleaming under the station lights as he looked down at the humans with obvious contempt, his height advantage of nearly 3 feet making the gesture even more insulting. So these are the humans who believe they deserve to sit among the powers of the galaxy, he said, his translator rendering his words in flat, emotionless tones that somehow made the mockery worse. I expected something more impressive. Ambassador Hayes moved to stand beside Daniel, her posture straight and her voice calm as she responded to the challenge. We are here at the invitation of the Galactic Council, Commander, and we expect to be treated with the same respect afforded to any other species. Participating in these negotiations, Zorath made a sound that might have been laughter among his kind, a harsh clicking that echoed through the corridor as his warriors joined in. Respect is earned through strength, human, and your species has demonstrated nothing but the ability to survive on your little world while the rest of us built empires and conquered star systems. Daniel felt his jaw tighten, but kept his expression neutral as more alien delegates began to gather, drawn by the confrontation that was clearly violating every protocol of diplomatic courtesy. Relari observer, her 4 eyes blinking in sequence as she watched the exchange, stepped closer with obvious curiosity. And beside her stood representatives from at least 6 other species that Daniel recognized from his briefing materials. If humanity wishes to negotiate as equals, Zorath continued, his voice rising so that everyone present could hear, then perhaps they should prove they deserve that honor through the old ways. Ambassador Hayes frowned at the statement, her tablet lowering as she sensed something dangerous taking shape. What exactly are you suggesting, Commander? I invoke the trial of worth, Zorath declared, and the words sent ripples of reaction through the gathered aliens, some gasping and others exchanging worried glances that told Daniel this was something serious. The trial of worth was outlawed by the Council decades ago. The Relari observer interjected, her voice carrying a tone of alarm for standard disputes. Yes, Zorath replied with obvious satisfaction, but it remains valid when a species seeks to join negotiations for the first time. And humanity has never participated in the trade accords before now. Daniel watched Ambassador Hayes pull up information on her tablet, her face growing pale as she read whatever she found there. "This is a combat trial," she said quietly. "And if we refuse, we forfeit our right to negotiate for 10 standard years." "Correct," Zorath confirmed, his smile revealing rows of sharp teeth that had evolved for tearing flesh. "And if you accept, one of your delegation must face a challenge of our choosing without weapons or armor, surviving for 10 standard minutes to prove your worth." The containment unit behind the Korvath warriors hummed louder, and Daniel finally understood what they had brought to this supposedly peaceful diplomatic gathering. "You planned this from the beginning," he said, and his voice carried enough edge that several aliens nearby took involuntary steps backward. Zorath turned his attention fully to Daniel for the first time, studying him with predator eyes that missed nothing. "Of course we did. Human, because your species needs to learn its place in the galaxy. And that lesson is best taught through blood and screaming." Ambassador Hayes looked at her small delegation. 5 humans total against a challenge designed to break them before negotiations even began. And Daniel could see the calculation happening behind her eyes as she weighed impossible options. He made the decision for her. "I accept the trial," Daniel said, stepping forward before anyone could stop him. "And whatever you have in that container, I will face it." The silence that followed stretched for several heartbeats before Zorath began to laugh again, the sound echoing through the corridor like a death sentence already pronounced. "Brave words, human, but bravery means nothing against what waits inside that cage. And by this time tomorrow, your delegation will be returning to Earth in shame while your body feeds the beast you so foolishly agreed to challenge." Daniel met the alien commander's gaze without flinching, and somewhere deep inside him, a cold calm settled into place as it always did before combat. "We will see," he replied simply. The Korvath warriors began moving the containment unit toward the station's arena level, and as Daniel watched it go, he heard something inside make a sound that was part growl and part scream, a noise that spoke of hunger and violence and death delivered without mercy. Tomorrow he would face whatever made that sound, and one way or another, humanity's place among the stars would be decided in blood. Ambassador Hayes gripped his arm as the crowd began to disperse, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you have any idea what you just agreed to?" Daniel looked at her, and despite everything, he managed a small smile that held no humor at all. "No," he admitted, "but I guess we are going to find out together." The arena occupied the entire lower level of the diplomatic station, a massive dome built centuries ago when honor combat between species was common and accepted as a legitimate way to settle disputes. And Daniel stood at its entrance the next morning, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his entire life. Ambassador Hayes had spent the night trying to find a legal way out of the trial, but every avenue led to the same conclusion. Either Daniel faced whatever the Korvath had brought, or humanity lost its chance at the trade accords for a decade. "The Relari diplomat came to see me this morning," she told him as they waited for the arena doors to open. "And she wanted me to know that no species has ever survived a Varaxian trial without weapons." Daniel absorbed this information with a slow nod, his mind already shifting into the focused state that had kept him alive through 3 combat deployments on Earth before humanity ever knew aliens existed. What exactly is a Varaxian? Ambassador Hayes pulled up an image on her tablet, and Daniel studied the creature with careful attention as she explained what humanity's intelligence services had gathered about it. The Varaxian was a nightmare given physical form. A 6-legged predator covered in armored scales that could deflect most handheld weapons, with venomous spines running along its back and claws designed for tearing through metal plating as easily as flesh. "They come from a death world in Korvath space," Hayes continued, "and their natural environment makes Earth look like a paradise in comparison. With temperatures that swing from boiling to freezing, predators that hunt in every ecosystem, and chemical storms that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. So the Corvath found the most dangerous thing on the most dangerous planet they control, Daniel said. And they brought it here specifically to kill me. That about sums it up, yes. The arena doors began to open, revealing the combat space beyond and the thousands of alien spectators who had gathered to watch humanity fail. Their varied faces displaying emotions ranging from curiosity to pity to outright anticipation of violence. Daniel walked through the entrance with his head held high, refusing to give the watching crowd any sign of the fear that churned in his stomach like acid. The arena floor was covered in sand that had been raked smooth, and the walls rose 30 feet before giving way to transparent barriers that protected the spectators from whatever happened below. Commander Zorath stood on an elevated platform with other Corvath officials, and his voice boomed through the arena's speaker system as Daniel reached the center of the sand. Beings of the Galactic Council, today we witness a trial of worth as humanity seeks to prove they deserve a place among us. And their champion has volunteered to face the apex predator of Corvath, prime without weapon or armor for 10 standard minutes. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Daniel heard fragments of conversation from species close enough to the barrier for their words to carry. 10 minutes is generous, someone said. The last challenger died in 40 seconds. Humans are supposed to be endurance predators, another voice replied. But endurance means nothing against a Varaxian. Daniel tuned out the speculation and focused on the massive door at the far end of the arena, where the containment unit had been positioned for release. The rules are simple, Zorath continued. The human must survive for 10 minutes without leaving the arena floor, and no outside assistance of any kind is permitted. And if he dies before time expires, humanity forfeits its right to negotiate. The countdown began on a display screen visible to everyone, showing 10 minutes in bright red numbers that had not yet started to decrease. Ambassador Hayes pressed her palm against the transparent barrier, her face tight with worry as she watched Daniel strip off his jacket and begin stretching his muscles. May I ask a question before we begin? Daniel called out, his voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet arena. Zorath seemed amused by the request and gestured for him to continue. Are there any rules against talking to it? Laughter erupted from the Corvath section of the crowd, and even some other species seemed to find the question ridiculous. Talk all you want, human, Zorath replied. The Varaxian does not understand language, and even if it did, it would not care about the pleading of its prey. Daniel nodded and turned to face the containment door, settling into a relaxed stance that looked almost casual to anyone who did not know what they were seeing. But the Relari diplomat watching from her seat recognized it immediately, and she leaned forward with sudden interest as she realized the human was not standing casually at all. He was standing like a predator, waiting for something to happen. The containment door began to rise, and the sound that emerged from behind it froze the blood of every being in the arena who had evolved with the instinct to fear. Apex hunters, the Varaxian, stepped into the light, and it was somehow worse than the images had prepared Daniel to expect. Its body moving with liquid grace despite its massive size, as 6 legs carried it forward in a pattern that looked almost hypnotic. Its head swung toward Daniel, nostrils flaring as it caught his scent, and eyes that held ancient hunger locked onto him with terrible focus. The timer started counting down from 10 minutes, and Daniel Carter was alone in the arena with a creature designed by evolution to kill everything it encountered. The Varaxian began to circle, and Daniel turned with it, keeping the beast in his line of sight as memories of training sessions and survival courses ran through his mind. Predators tested their prey before committing to an attack, he remembered, and intelligent predators were especially cautious because they had learned that easy meals sometimes came with hidden costs. The Varaxian was testing him right now, watching for signs of panic or weakness that would mark him as safe to attack. Daniel controlled his breathing and kept his movements slow and deliberate, refusing to give the creature what it was looking for. 9 minutes and 30 seconds remained on the clock, and somewhere in the crowd, the Relari diplomat began to wonder if she was about to witness something that the galaxy had never seen before. The Varaxian completed its first circle around Daniel and began a second one, moving in the opposite direction as it continued gathering information about this strange creature that stood in its territory without running or screaming or doing any of the things prey was supposed to do. Daniel matched its movement with careful steps, never turning his back to the beast and never breaking eye contact for more than a second at a time. 8 minutes and 45 seconds remained on the clock. The crowd had grown silent, the earlier anticipation of quick violence replaced by confusion as nothing happened in the arena below. Commander Zorath leaned forward on his platform, his earlier smugness fading into something that looked almost like irritation. "The creature is simply playing with its food," he announced over the speakers. "The human will break soon enough, and then the trial will end as expected." But Daniel was not going to break, and he knew exactly what the Varaxian was doing because he had studied predator behavior his entire adult life. First as a hunter in the forests of his home state, and later as a soldier who needed to understand how enemies thought. The Varaxian was uncertain, and that uncertainty was keeping Daniel alive. He began to speak in a low, steady voice, the words themselves meaningless, but the tone carrying a message that transcended language. "Easy now. Big guy, we are just two hunters sharing the same space, and neither of us needs to do anything stupid today." The Varaxian's head tilted slightly at the sound. Its ears, or whatever, served as ear swiveling to track the noise. A Korvath scientist monitoring the trial from a control room spoke into his communicator, his voice carrying a note of surprise that drew attention from those nearby. "The human's vital signs are unusual," he reported. "His heart rate is elevated but holding steady at approximately 100 beats per minute, and his breathing pattern suggests deliberate control rather than panic." Zora snatched the communicator from the scientist's hand. "What does that mean?" "It means he is afraid," the scientist replied. "But he is using the fear instead of being controlled by it. And I have never seen a prey species demonstrate this level of biological regulation under threat." The Varaxian chose that moment to attack it, launched forward with explosive speed, 6 legs driving it across the sand in a blur of scales and claws and terrible purpose. Daniel had been waiting for exactly this moment, and he moved in the only direction the beast would not expect toward. I dove forward and to the left, passing under the Varaxian's snapping jaws by inches as its momentum carried it past him and into the arena wall with a crash that shook the entire structure. The crowd erupted in shock noise, thousands of aliens crying out in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Daniel rolled to his feet and turned to face the Varaxian again, his shoulder bleeding from where a claw had grazed him during the near miss. But his expression remained calm and focused. "That was not bad," he said to the beast. "But you telegraph your attacks about half a second early, and that is going to be a problem for you." 7 minutes and 15 seconds remained. The Varaxian shook itself and turned back toward Daniel, and something in its posture had changed in a way that even the watching aliens could recognize. It was no longer treating this as an easy hunt. The second attack came faster and more controlled, the Varaxian learning from its mistake and adjusting its approach with the intelligence that made it such a deadly predator. Daniel dodged again, but this time the beast anticipated his movement and changed direction mid-charge, its claws catching his leg and opening a gash that immediately began soaking his pants with blood. He stumbled but did not fall, pushing through the pain to put distance between himself and the Varaxian before it could follow up with a killing blow. "Okay," he muttered. "So you can learn? That makes this more interesting." The Relari diplomat had risen from her seat without realizing it, her 4 eyes fixed on the arena floor as she watched the impossible unfold before her. "He is treating it like a dance," she whispered to her aide. "He is not trying to defeat it. He is trying to understand it." Her aide looked at her with confusion. "What difference does that make?" "All the difference in the galaxy," she replied. "Because understanding is how humans survived on their death world. They learned their predators instead of just fearing them. And this one is doing the same thing right now." 6 minutes remained. The Varaxian circled again. Its movements more cautious now, as it processed the reality that this prey was different from anything it had faced before. Daniel used a brief pause to control his breathing and assess his injuries. The gash on his leg serious, but not immediately life-threatening as long as he kept moving. He began speaking again, his voice low and rhythmic. And something strange happened as the Varaxian listened. Its aggression began to fade, not disappear, but fade, like a fire that was running out of fuel. "I know what you are," Daniel said. "And I know you are just doing what nature built you to do. But I am not going to make this easy for you. Because my people did not survive our world by being easy prey." The Varaxian made a sound that was almost like a question, a noise its handlers had never heard before. Commander Zoreth gripped the railing of his platform so hard that the metal began to bend under his fingers. 5 minutes and 30 seconds remained. And for the first time since the trial began, he was not certain of the outcome. The blood from Daniel's leg wound had soaked through his pants and was dripping onto the sand, leaving a trail that marked his movements across the arena floor like a map of desperation that any predator should have followed to an easy kill. But the Varaxian was not following the blood. Tralid was watching Daniel with an expression that the crowd had never seen on its face before, something that looked almost like confusion mixed with what might have been respect. 5 minutes remained on the clock. Daniel could feel his body weakening from blood loss, the edges of his vision starting to blur, as his heart worked harder to pump what remained through his system. He did not have enough time to simply survive by dodging and running. Needed to change the game entirely. "You know what separates us from the animals we evolved alongside?" he asked the Varaxian, his voice carrying across the silent arena as thousands of aliens leaned forward to hear. "It is not our intelligence or our tools or our ability to work together." Although all of those things helped, the Varaxian's head tilted again, its body still and watchful. "What separates us," Daniel continued, "is that we learn to look predators in the eye and refuse to be afraid. Or rather, we learn to be afraid and still stand our ground anyway." He took a step toward the Varaxian crowd, gasped as one, the sound echoing through the arena like thunder. The Varaxian's muscles tensed, but it did not attack. Its instincts struggling to process a prey animal that moved toward danger instead of away from it. Daniel took another step. "On my world, we have a saying," he said, "and it goes something like this. The wolf that is fed will always be weaker than the wolf that hunts, because hunger is what keeps you sharp." Another step, closer now, close enough that he could see the individual scales on the Varaxian's hide and count the venomous spines along its back. "That there is another part to that wisdom," Daniel continued, "and it is this. Sometimes the prey fights back, and when it does, the smart predator learns to find easier meals elsewhere." He stopped walking when he was less than 10 feet from the Varaxian, while within its striking range, close enough that it could kill him in a single motion if it chose to. Attack 4 minutes remained. The arena had become so quiet that Daniel could hear his own blood dripping onto the sand. Then he did something that made even the Korvath warriors watching from the stands rise to their feet in disbelief. He growled. Sound came from deep in his chest, a rumbling vibration that carried no words but spoke a universal language. Understood by every predator that had ever lived. It was the sound of challenge, the sound of a creature announcing that it would not be taken without a fight. The sound that prey never made, because prey was supposed to run. The Varaxian took a step backward. Commander Zorath was shouting something, his voice lost in the sudden chaos of the crowd, as aliens of every species tried to make sense of what they were. Witnessing the Relari diplomat had tears streaming from all four of her eyes. Though she could not have explained why if asked, humans did not survive their world by being the strongest or the fastest. Ambassador Hayes said to no one in particular, her own voice, thick with emotion, they survived by being too stubborn to know when they were beaten. 3 minutes remained. The Varaxian had stopped retreating, but it had also stopped advancing. Its body locked in a posture of indecision that its handlers had never seen before. Daniel felt the weakness growing worse, his body demanding that he sit down and rest, that he stop fighting and let whatever was going to happen just happen. He refused instead. He did the one thing that should have been suicide, the action that violated every rule of survival against apex predators. He turned his back on the Varaxian and walked toward the center of the arena. The crowd erupted in screaming, aliens crying out warnings in a dozen different languages. Everyone certain that they were about to watch the human die in the most foolish way possible. But Daniel did not die. The Varaxian did not attack. It stood frozen, every instinct screaming at it to pounce on the exposed prey, but something deeper holding it back. Some ancient recognition that this creature was not behaving like prey at all. 2 minutes remained. Daniel reached the center of the arena and turned to face the Varaxian again, his posture straight despite the agony in his leg and the darkness creeping at the edges of his vision. I am not your enemy, he said, and I am not your food, and if you attack me now, one of us will die, and the other will be wounded so badly that it might as well be dead. He spread his arms wide, leaving himself completely open. So what is it going to be? The Varaxian looked at him with those ancient predator eyes, and something passed between them that transcended species and evolution, and all the differences that separated a human from an alien. Beast recognition. 1 minute remained. The Varaxian lowered its head and made a sound that was almost like a sigh, its body relaxing from attack posture into something that looked almost peaceful. 30 seconds. Daniel stayed where he was, arms still spread, blood still dripping, refusing to move or show weakness until the timer reached 0:15 seconds. The crowd had gone silent again, every being in the arena holding their breath as the final moments counted. Down 10 seconds, 5 seconds, 0, the buzzer sounded, and Daniel Carter was still standing, and the Varaxian had not attacked, and humanity had just passed a trial that no other species had ever survived. The silence that followed the buzzer lasted for 3 full seconds before the arena exploded into chaos. Thousands of alien voices crying out in languages that Daniel did not understand, but whose meaning was clear enough in tone alone. Disbelief, amazement, and something that might have been all medical personnel rushed onto the arena floor the moment the barriers lowered, their equipment already activated to treat the wounds that had been bleeding for nearly 10 minutes while Daniel stood his ground against the most dangerous predator in Korvath space. He let them work on his leg without complaint, his eyes staying fixed on the Varaxian as handlers moved cautiously toward it with containment equipment ready. The beast had not moved from where it stood, its posture still relaxed as it watched Daniel with an expression that seemed almost thoughtful. Commander Zorath descended from his platform with murder in his eyes, pushing through the crowd of medical staff and handlers until he stood before Daniel with his fists clenched at his sides. This trial is invalid, he declared, his voice loud enough to carry across the arena. The human must have cheated somehow, used some hidden device or chemical agent to confuse the Varaxian senses. A Korvath elder stepped forward from the crowd, her scales gray with age and her bearing carrying the weight of authority that even Zorath could not ignore. I observed the entire trial personally, she said, and scanned the arena for any technological interference. and I detected nothing but one human male facing our apex beast with nothing but his bare hands and his will to survive. Then explain how he did it, Zorath demanded, because no species has ever survived a Varaxian trial, and certainly not by walking toward the creature instead of running away. The elder turned to look at Daniel, her ancient eyes studying him with curiosity that held no hostility. Perhaps the human can explain it himself. Daniel accepted his support, braced from the medical team, and tested his leg before answering. The wound sealed with advanced healing agents, but still tender enough to remind him how close he had come to bleeding out on the arena floor. There is no trick to explain, he said, only understanding. He looked around at the gathered aliens, their faces showing every shade of emotion, from skepticism to fascination. My species evolved on a world filled with predators, larger and stronger and faster than we were. And we should have gone extinct 100 times over if pure physical ability was all that mattered. Ambassador Hayes had made her way to his side, her hand resting on his shoulder in support as he continued speaking. But we did not go extinct, Daniel said, because we learned something that changed everything. Predators do not waste energy on prey that might hurt them. They look for easy kills, safe kills, and anything that signals danger makes them hesitate. He gestured toward the Varaxian, which was still watching him instead of responding to its handler's attempts to guide it back into containment. I could not outrun that creature or outfight it, but I could make it question whether killing me was worth the risk. And that hesitation was all I needed to survive. The Relari diplomat pushed through the crowd until she reached Daniel, her 4 eyes bright with something that looked like wonder. Gambled your life on the psychology of an alien predator, she said, based purely on the assumption that it would think like the predators of your homeworld. Not an assumption, Daniel replied, an educated guess based on evolutionary principles that apply everywhere. Because survival is survival no matter what planet you come from. And predators that take unnecessary risks do not live long enough to reproduce. Zorath made a sound of disgust and turned to the elder. You cannot seriously accept this trial as valid. He did nothing but stand there and make noise. The elder's response was calm but carried an edge that silenced the commander immediately. He did exactly what the rules required. He survived for 10 minutes without weapons or armor or outside assistance. And he did so by demonstrating qualities that the trial of worth was designed to measure. She looked at Daniel with something that might have been respect, courage, intelligence, and the ability to understand opponents well enough to defeat them without violence. These are the marks of a species worthy of standing among us. The crowd began to murmur in agreement. Representatives from dozens of species nodding as they discussed what they had witnessed. Ambassador Hayes stepped forward, her voice carrying the formal tone of diplomatic protocol. Humanity accepts the judgment of the elder and formally requests recognition as equal partners in the trade accords negotiations. The elder raised one clawed hand in a gesture of acknowledgement. Humanity's request is granted, and their place at the negotiating table is confirmed. Zorath looked like he wanted to argue further, but the weight of opinion had turned against him, and even his own warriors were looking at Daniel with expressions that suggested grudging admiration. The commander leaned close to Daniel as the crowd began to disperse. How did you know it would work? He demanded in a low voice. How could you possibly have been certain that the Varaxian would not simply kill you when you turned your back? Daniel met his eyes without flinching. I was not certain, he admitted, but I learned a long time ago that sometimes the only way to survive is to convince the monster that eating you is not worth the trouble. And that required me to stop acting like prey. He paused. Then it's something that made Zorath's scales darken with what might have been embarrassment. Your beast is smarter than you gave it credit for, Commander, and it recognized something that you apparently could not. Humans are not prey. Daniel turned away from the sputtering Corvette and walked toward the arena exit. Ambassador Hayes beside him and the Relari diplomat following close behind at the containment area. The Varaxian had finally allowed itself to be guided back into its transport unit, but it paused at the entrance and turned to look at Daniel. One last time, it made a sound that its handlers had never heard before. A low rumble that carried no threat at all. The head handler looked at Daniel with wide eyes. In 30 years of working with Varaxians, I have never heard one make that noise. What does it mean? The handler shook his head slowly, clearly struggling to find words, if I had to guess. I would say it sounds like acknowledgement, like the noise a Varaxian might make to recognize another hunter as an equal. Daniel looked at the beast for a long moment, then nodded once in response. The Varaxian made the sound again, then turned and walked into containment without resistance. Ambassador Hayes squeezed Daniel's arm as they continued toward the exit. "You just changed everything," she said quietly. "Humanity's relationship with the galaxy will be different after today." Daniel thought about the fear he had felt in that arena, the certainty that he was going to die, and the decision to stand his ground anyway because running would have only delayed the inevitable. "I did not change anything," he replied. "I just showed them what we have always been." The Relari diplomat caught up to them at the corridor junction. "I would like to formally request a human security advisor for my delegation," she said, "if your government would consider such an arrangement." Daniel looked at Ambassador Hayes, who nodded with a small smile. "I think that can be arranged," Hayes replied behind them. The arena lights dimmed as cleaning crews began preparing the space for whatever event would come next, but the sand still held the marks of Daniel's blood and footprints. Evidence of a trial that would be remembered and discussed for generations. Humanity had earned its place among the stars, not through weapons or technology or conquest, through courage, understanding, and the stubborn refusal to be treated as prey. And somewhere in the station, a Varaxian settled into its containment unit and dreamed of the strange creature that had looked it in the eye and refused to be afraid.